It's Thursday, so it's time for Worldview with Denis Campbell. Denis is editor-in-chief of UK Progressive Magazine and also author of the blockbuster new ebook, The Vagina Wars, which is doing incredibly well. So congratulations on that, Denis. I figure since it is election day in the UK, it's a good day to talk about paper ballots, voting machines, debold, scams, voter caging, all of that stuff. So first, talk a little bit about the election process in the UK and what type of ballots are being used there.
Well, today is indeed election day. It's not a national election, although it goes across the entire nation. It's for all of the local county councils and some of the larger city councils, as well as for several mayorships. So pretty much if you're involved in local government, this is your one big day in the sun. There's a number of folks here. I live in something called the Vale of Glamorgan. There are 20 or so councillors, 30 councillors, excuse me, that are all up for re-election. And the ballot is set up in such a way that you can pick a number of different people. The way we vote in this country is, believe it or not, we used old-fashioned paper ballots. The ballots are the type that you would put and affix an X or a mark to clearly indicate that that's the candidate you support. They then get put into a box. That box is in one of many polling stations across the county. They're usually porta-cabin type trailers. They're locked and sealed in these little ballot boxes, and the boxes at the end of the voting day at 10 p.m. when polls close are then transported to a central counting facility in the city of Barrie, which is the larger seat in this particular county. And having watched the process, it's absolutely fascinating to see that at the stroke of 10 p.m., the first two ballot boxes that are opened and counted right there before your eyes are the absentee and mail-in ballots, which is not always a guaranteed thing in the United States, my understanding is, having lived there. So you watch these pieces of paper being strewn out across tables, and there's a team of young women and men with little thimbles on their fingers that are sitting there riffling through and counting them into stacks of 50. They want to make certain that the count squares with what the polling places said were the number of people that voted for that day. Then they go through the process of actually counting, and there are several steps along the process. And they sit inside of a horseshoe ring of tables, which any candidate can then go along the outside of and have himself, herself, or surrogates sit there and verify and watch the actual count as it takes place. It's really a fascinating exercise in democracy. And we're under no illusion or deadline of an 11 p.m. news hour. The count takes as long as the count takes. So
okay, so let's talk about that briefly.
Go to 2 and 3 in the morning.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. In the U.S., you alluded to something in the U.S., which is this kind of urgency that's been created to get results by a certain amount of time that corresponds with the news cycle. Do you think that that is mostly media-driven, as might be kind of the obvious explanation, or do you think it may be more candidate or corporation-driven? I mean, how did that develop? This wasn't always the case.
No, it wasn't always the case. But if you remember, I don't know how many people remember back to the election of 2008. We note at the stroke of 11 p.m., based only on exit polling and a few preliminary results, they were able to determine that Barack Obama was elected the 44th president of the United States.
Sure, and that was under the assumption that it was Ohio at 11 p.m. that they called for Obama. Is that correct, or was that 10 o'clock?
No, actually, he'd had Ohio long in the bag at that particular point.
Okay, so that was 10 o'clock.
It was when California and Hawaii and Oregon and Washington, and of course the big surprise, Nevada, all reported in his favor. That was what he was. By the time they got to the Mountain Time Zone, he was already pretty much there. But once they declared on the Western Coast time zone at the stroke of 11 p.m. Eastern, it was done.
Right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit then about, we've seen a lot of voting controversies in the U.S., of course, back in 2000 with Al Gore and George W. Bush, in Ohio in 2004, and we see these kind of on an ongoing basis. We have the debold voting machines, which there's ongoing discussion of, can these be hacked? How easy is it to hack them? Talk a little bit about the work you've done on that front.
Well, back in 2006, I was first approached by a group of people in Arizona because I knew one of them very, very well. He had worked for the NSA for a number of years, and they were questioning in Pima County, which is the area around Tucson, which is the only Democratic really county in all of Arizona. the results of an election for a bond bid. And when my friend said, Dennis, you really need to take a look at this, at first my reaction was, okay, it really sounds like just a bunch of conspiracy nutters. But then the more I looked in, the more I realized, wait a minute, what they're talking about was real. And in the course of my investigation, talking to them, talking to the folks at Black Box Voting, talking to the Secretary of State, Deb Bowen in California, and others, I realized there were some systemic problems with these voting machines. And there's a film called Hacking Democracy, which you can still find on YouTube. There's something called the Hursti, Hursti, named after Harry Hursti, the Hursti hack, where you can actually see the 2 points of entry where you can hack an actual election. One of them is in the little memory card that sits inside of the scanning machine. You can actually pre-program that to show what's called a false count. So even though you come out with the number of ballots that are scanned, you can say, if yes, subtract 4. So if Obama, subtract 4, and put them over onto the side of Romney. And that's one of the things that's been driving all of the things that they've been talking about in Arizona. And my concern is you can hack it at the machine, but more importantly, you can hack it at the GEMS central tabulation computer. And if you're spending 7 figures to buy adverts via a super PAC, what's to say, and obviously just speculation here, that a large envelope of cash could not end up in a county official's pocket to look the other way when somebody wanted to actually hack the machines. This is the biggest threat to democracy in America right now, the one person, one vote premise and under which we've operated for years. You just don't know for certain with these machines because there's no paper trail. And in some states, it's even illegal to keep a paper trail. And you're relying on technology, when the same people who have been at the polls for the last 40 years working are still there, and you just have no certainty that your vote is actually going to be counted as it was cast.
Right. Well, that was going to be my next question, which is what kind of trail is or isn't created, and how can this be, can you potentially even prove that something like this was done? But you seem to have proactively told me that it is very difficult to track this down.
It is that there are, each machine, when you turn it on, goes through a system check, and it tells you, of course, we're ready to start. It scans the ballots, and then you put an N card through, and that says, okay, everything is done. There are these things that come out of the machine called poll tapes, and those are where you could, if you needed to, go back to the actual ballots and then compare 1 to 1. But it's at several states, the most notable being Arizona, where guess who was the Secretary of State when these machines came in? None other than current Governor Jan Brewer oversaw all this. You find yourself in a situation where everything just strains credulity. You would think that those that are working at the county and the government level would want to ensure transparency and want to ensure accuracy, but really they're mostly concerned that someone is actually questioning them. So a lot of this gets caught up in unneeded lawsuits. There have been about 5 lawsuits filed in Pima County alone, just trying to get to the bottom of this issue. And the Brad blog has also done a lot of work in this area as well, trying to get to the bottom of these machines and expose them for what they are.
Right, and in Florida in 2000, of course, Secretary of State Catherine Harris. So we have a long history of coincidental secretaries of state. We've been speaking with Denis Campbell. He's editor-in-chief of UK Progressive Magazine, also author of the hugely successful new ebook, The Vagina Wars, The Republican War on Women. Great to talk to you, Denis, and hopefully next week we'll talk to you from D.C.
Indeed, I'm coming to the States, so I look forward to. Hopefully this will work and all the technology gods will get us there from the Capitol building itself.